everyone. My name is Deborah Royster, and I'm General Counsel to the District of Columbia Office on Aging. We are here today to discuss an important and growing challenge that is confronting our city and our nation as our population ages: the prevention of elder abuse and neglect. The statistics on elder abuse and neglect are startling and alarming. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, the most recent major studies on incidents reported that 7.6% to 10% of study participants experienced abuse in the prior year, while an overwhelming number of abuse and neglect cases go undetected each year. In addition, the increasing incidence of financial exploitation of seniors is very troubling. In fact, financial exploitation of seniors has been called the crime of the 21st century. As part of the DC Age Friendly City Initiative, the government of the District of Columbia has identified the prevention of elder abuse, neglect, and fraud as one of 10 domains of focus to influence the health and quality of life of seniors in the District of Columbia. Today, we have assembled a panel of experts in our community who are dedicated to the prevention of elder abuse and neglect in the District of Columbia. Dr. Sheila Jones, Chief, DC Adult Protective Services; Douglas Klein, Assistant U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia; Theodore Miles from the DC Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking; and Lynn Person, Director, DC State Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for participating in this important discussion today. Let's begin by asking each of you to briefly describe the mission and activities of your agency. Dr. Jones?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Adult Protective Services is a crisis-centered and investigation-based division within the Department of Human Services, Family Services Administration. Our mission is to investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and exploitation. You made a very interesting point when you talked about the underreporting of abuse. That would certainly translate here in the District of Columbia. Last year, Adult Protective Services investigated only 838 cases. We are certainly understanding that there are far more cases than what we are actually being reported. So I would like to underscore the underreporting of abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and exploitation.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Doug, tell us about the activities of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia.
The United States Attorney's Office, it's a federal arm of the Department of Justice. We are the federal prosecutors for the District of Columbia, but our office is the largest U.S. Attorney's Office in the country because we prosecute both the federal crimes and the local crimes in the District of Columbia that are committed by adults. We do cases from solicitation to prostitution, theft, carjacking, murder, all the way up to national terrorism cases, public corruption, and of course we prosecute perpetrators of elder abuse, whether that be physical or financial. When we receive a referral from law enforcement, an arrest, or from one of the agencies, we investigate the case. The case is assigned to a prosecutor, and we will then present that evidence in court and prosecute the perpetrator of those crimes and hopefully obtain a conviction for the crimes that they've committed against an elderly person.
Thank you, Doug. Tony, the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking is also involved in elder abuse prevention issues. Would you please give us a description of your activities?
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking has two main parts to its mission. The first is investor and consumer protection by regulation of the three main industries: financial services, insurance, securities, and banking, and second by the establishment of a healthy climate for economic development in the city. We are committed to the protection of people who may be vulnerable to financial exploitation, particularly seniors, and we're delighted we've worked well with all of the other people on this panel, and we look forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Tony. And then I know the DC State Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program has a large role in elder abuse prevention issues. Would you please give us some details of your key activities?
Absolutely, and thank you for having us here today, or having me here on behalf of the DC Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program as the DC State Ombudsman. The Ombudsman Program is housed with Legal Counsel for the Elderly. The contract was awarded back in 1975. And since such time, we have operated in the district as a federally mandated program with Legal Counsel for the Elderly. The main function of the Ombudsman Program is to advocate on behalf of residents receiving long-term care services in nursing homes, assisted living, and community residence facilities. In October 2012, we were fortunate enough, thanks to the support of the DC City Council, to expand the scope of our services to include advocacy services for individuals receiving long-term services and supports through the Elderly and Persons with Physical Disabilities waiver. With respect to elder abuse and neglect prevention, what our office does extremely well through the Ombudsman within the program and our staff attorney is to educate our residents and the other public at large about elder abuse and what they can do, how they can support this mission across, here specifically in the district, but supporting it across the country as well, and increasing the awareness. We have individuals who develop and conduct community outreach and education on almost a daily basis, at least a weekly basis, to continue this education. With Legal Counsel for the Elderly, they provide free legal services to district residents ages 60 and older and assist with legal issues such as foreclosures, evictions, developing wills and powers of attorneys for the residents that we serve across the district. And we consider ourselves, and we are, champions for the dignity and the rights of the district residents.
Thank you, Lynn. And we should note, as Tony pointed out earlier, that all of the assembled stakeholders here today are members of the Office on Aging's Elder Abuse Prevention Committee, and we all regularly work together on elder abuse prevention issues. Let's kick off the discussion today by really posing this question to everyone. What are some of the key markers and or signs of elder abuse or neglect? Dr. Jones?
Some of the key real prevalent ones that we see are persons who are presenting with bruising, evidence of illegal use of persons' bank cards, fraudulent activity on their banking accounts by writing checks and the like on their accounts. These are just some of the things that we see. We also see where a person is not taking their medication because it's not being given to them. They're intentionally being held from taking their medication. This can be very serious in a very vulnerable population like this, where persons have many comorbidities. And this can often prove to be fatal or lethal to a lot of individuals.
Yes. And Doug, what are some of the signs that you've seen in some of the cases that you've prosecuted?
Unfortunately, with elder abuse, a lot of it occurs behind closed doors. And unfortunately, a lot of elder abuse is perpetrated by family members. And what we do in these type of cases is we try to get law enforcement to be able to recognize some of the signs. For example, if you go into an elderly person's house and they have a family member living with them, but you see that the place is unkempt, it's dirty, the elderly person looks like they're not being cared for, you know, their clothes are dirty, they haven't been bathed, there's not a lot of food in the refrigerator. If for some reason you're able to go into where that elderly person is sleeping and you see restraints, that person might be, you know, being kept in that bedroom. So the bottom line is, with these cases, what you have is the perpetrator wants to isolate, control, physically control the person, mentally control the person, and financially control that person. Usually when you have financial abuse, you have physical and mental abuse. It all goes hand in hand. So we, once again, you know, we work collaboratively with all the agencies to, you know, get in there and, you know, obviously find out what's going on in the home, isolate the senior, getting them away from the person who's taking care of them, so there's no control, so they can get the real story. So the cases are very difficult, but, you know, we want to prosecute these cases aggressively and work with these agencies to, you know, get more reporting, prosecute these perpetrators and you know, put them behind bars, or at least get them away
Yes.
from the victims, so the victim doesn't end up, unfortunately, you know, where it can end up in
Yes.
death. Yes.
Both are important, both reporting and enforcement. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lynn, what are some of the examples of cases that your agency has been involved in involving elder abuse and neglect issues?
And there have been several that our office has been involved with. One that comes to mind was a 96-year-old female who was admitted to a nursing home and who was found to have a sexually transmitted disease. And from what we had known before, the person had lived alone but had someone providing care, and that person did happen to be a male. There are other cases where we've had where a family member has contacted our office to lodge a complaint regarding the care, the quality of care that their loved one is receiving in a nursing home, such as unexplained bruising, unexplained fractures or sprains, other incidents of verbal abuse by staff where they're threatening and intimidating towards the resident. Also in our home and community-based settings program, we have actually had family members and or the resident to contact our office to complain about theft, to complain about the physical abuse, to complain about being left alone in the home when the supervision and the personal care aid services were actually in fact provided and required for that person to sustain their life in the community and to also promote the highest quality of care in life for that person.
Thank you very much. We'll have more when we come back.
Did you take your medicine?
Oh gosh, I forgot it.
Her nurse,
Need a claim number?
her personal assistant,
Let me just grab a.
her housekeeper, her cook, her accountant. When I started taking care of Mom, I didn't realize the challenge of playing so many roles. But above all, I'm still her daughter.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving to connect with experts and other caregivers. Together we can better care for ourselves and the ones we love.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
Welcome back. Let's turn our discussion to the question of who are the perpetrators of abuse of seniors? Dr. Jones?
Surprisingly, the faces of perpetrators can be just about anyone. Caregivers, we find family, friends, neighbors, oftentimes are the actual perpetrators. And sadly speaking, they can also be the spouse of some of these seniors or some of those persons where we talked about the sandwich generation and the seniors are living in the home with their daughter or their son, and then the spouse ends up being the perpetrator that actually is abusing the senior.
So the perpetrator tends to be someone who's in a trusted position?
That would be correct. Absolutely.
And Lynn, what, in your experience, what would you add to that?
Very little. It appears as though Dr. Jones kind of gave the full list, but what does come to mind is a scam artist. And I think in what Dr. Jones was saying when we talk about family members and people who are close to us and people that we trust, sometimes that's very difficult to understand when we're having these kinds of conversations, but those are generally the individuals who are the perpetrators of such crimes. And we like to educate our residents once again about that, and that everyone may not have your best interests at heart, and that you need to be very careful who you trust, even when it comes to your family members.
And
Let me just add quickly that in our department we tend to see the cases where it's not a family member, but someone who is claiming to have some financial opportunity for the senior to take advantage, and they get into the person's confidence, but they are starting from a different situation,
Yes.
and they will take advantage of a person's loneliness and trusting nature.
That's a very good point. And I'd like to sort of add to Ms. Persons with regard to individuals, because oftentimes that leads to the underreporting when it's a family member or persons that you trust, and they feel embarrassed. They feel that it brings a poor reputation to their family, and so they just decide they try to live with it and not report it.
They could also be fearful because they depend on
for
that
retaliation
person.
as well. Yes.
And that situation, from a prosecutorial standpoint, when it's perpetrated by somebody who lives in the home, caregiver, usually a family member, unfortunately. If it's a family member in the home living together, that's a domestic violence case, just like a husband and a wife. If you have a son abusing a grandmother, that's a domestic violence case. We have a unit specifically dedicated to prosecuting domestic violence cases, prosecutors that are highly trained and dedicated and prosecute these cases aggressively.
Excellent. Tony, I know financial exploitation is a growing and particularly troubling form of elder abuse. Why are seniors particularly vulnerable to financial exploitation, and what are some of the examples that your agency has encountered?
Thank you, Deborah. First of all, seniors tend to have resources, and so they are a target for bad people. They have perhaps a spouse has passed away, or they've retired, they've built up equity in a home, so they have assets. That's number one. And then they are perhaps lonely and vulnerable.
Or isolated.
Isolated, and they're then exposed to people, either phone calls or solicitations over the internet or by mail, and they have to be very cognizant of that. The other thing that's really alarming is that older people, some of them are experiencing cognitive decline.
Yes.
So they may not recognize the danger in a situation. They may not be able to understand the financial implications of some opportunity that's being offered to them as a way to get rich quick. So they can be taken advantage of in a way that would never have happened, say, to the same person 10, 15 years earlier.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Sheila, how should elder abuse and neglect be reported by a citizen or anyone who has a suspicion about the possibility of it occurring?
If you suspect abuse, neglect, self-neglect, or exploitation, Adult Protective Services has a 24-hour hotline, 7 days a week.
And what is that telephone number?
And that telephone number, please, 202-541-3950.
And let's repeat it one more time.
202-541-3950.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would also like to add, if I may, the DC Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program also has a hotline whereby anyone can contact our office regarding residents in the nursing home, assisted living, community residence facility, or receiving those services, as I mentioned earlier, in the community. And they can contact our hotline at 202-434-2190.
And if I just may add, I mean, it's very simple. If you actually see a crime, like, you know, you're a witness to a crime, call 911.
Yes.
You call the police.
That's right.
Obviously, a lot of these crimes are perpetrated behind closed doors. You don't really see it's actually occurring, and you might have suspicions. That's when you go Adult Protective Services, Ombudsman, or IARP. But if you actually see a crime occur, please call the police, 911, so they can respond to the scene, take a report, investigate the case to see what actually occurred.
Thank you. And we will, at the conclusion of our program, we will give you a reference so that you can identify some of the community resources and locate those resources that we're discussing on the program today. We'd like to turn our attention at the moment to the mandatory reporting law in the District of Columbia. Can you describe, Dr. Jones, what that law is and who it covers?
Sure. Based on the DC Official Code 7-1903, mandatory reporters in the District of Columbia, which would include a very long list, but I would suffice it to say certainly physicians and other healthcare personnel, even humane officers,
social workers, police.
Mm-hmm. There are multiple lists of individuals and can be found in that official code. 7-1903. But basically the law states that as a mandatory reporter, you must report abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and exploitation to Adult Protective Services, even if you suspect and you're not even sure. You must at least report it. Not reporting it does have some consequences. Those consequences can be not only monetary, but as well as can have an imprisonment also associated with it in terms of time served and of course the fines.
So mandatory reporters are required to report. There are also, as I understand it, voluntary reporters. People can report voluntarily. Can you?
Yes.
And citizens can do this, right?
Anyone can report abuse, neglect, self-neglect, or exploitation, even anonymously.
Right.
However, mandatory reporters must give
right.
all the referral information, including their name, their contact information.
Right.
They cannot report anonymously.
Let me just supplement
Yes.
Dr. Jones's point. Financial managers, banks and
Yes.
other institutions
Thank you for
that
that.
have
Yes.
custody over a person's assets, money, and the like are subject to that mandatory reporting. And that is one of the early warning signs often that something is amiss. So we really remind that community, any banks and insurance companies and securities firms, if they suspect financial abuse, they are required to report it to Adult Protective Services.
And that would also include, if I may add, fiduciary. There are issues around guardians and conservators. They too are mandatory reporters, and they must as well report any of the allegations to Adult Protective Services.
Great.
And I
Thank
think
you.
it's important for the community to know that ombudsmen are not mandatory reporters. At one time they were, and that law has changed since then. And there's a benefit to it, there's a upside to it and a downside to it. And the way it works for us is that because we have such a strict confidentiality clause between the ombudsman and the resident, this is in line with that, and we want the resident to know, again, if this is something that you're not comfortable with us communicating with someone else, then we do not. However, the downside now is that there's a serious incident, allegation of abuse or neglect that has occurred, and we want to be able to do something about it to bring the appropriate outcome for that resident. And we take that opportunity to actually inform and educate the resident of the possible outcomes and the consequences of not communicating that abuse or neglect, that allegation or an actual incident of abuse and neglect.
And even if a person isn't a mandatory reporter, any citizen can report voluntarily and in a confidential manner. Is that the case, Dr. Jones?
That would be accurate.
Great, excellent. And that's important because many times we as neighbors, friends, associates have an opportunity to observe some behavior or some action that gives us reason to suspect there could be a case of elder abuse or neglect. Let's turn to the issue of prosecuting these cases. Doug, what are some of the challenges that you face in prosecuting elder abuse and neglect cases?
Well, the main challenge, of course, is reluctant witnesses. It's not any different from a lot of the cases we prosecute, murder, carjackings, violent crimes. A lot of people, are intimidated by the court system. They do not want to come forward and prosecute, and even if they initially come forward and prosecute, report a case, they later on have second thoughts. But what we do is we have a victim witness advocate unit. And these victim witness advocates are not prosecutors. They are actually victim witness advocates who are assigned to the victim or the witness. And they will actually handhold that victim or witness through the court system.
Right.
So you not only have a prosecutor who's prosecuting the crime and the perpetrator, you have a victim witness advocate who is going to work with you, explain what's going on. We have different services that we provide. It's not easy to testify, it's not easy to be a witness, but we try to do our best to make sure that the witness is comfortable, the victim is comfortable, and to get them into court. And of course, not all cases end up in a trial. A lot of cases end up pleading guilty also, so they no longer have to testify in court. But mainly it's the reluctance of elders to prosecute, tell family, prosecute family members, report crimes. They just don't do it, and it's underreporting is the main problem.
But it's so important to prosecute these cases.
It is,
vigilantly.
and we do not, we prosecute these cases just like any other case. We prosecute them aggressively, and if we have the evidence, we will prosecute that case and take it to court.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Did you know the District of Columbia Office on Aging provides services to individuals who are 60 and older and persons living with disabilities? Did you know that the agency has 6 senior wellness centers throughout the city, partners with 20 community-based organizations, 3 local universities, and sponsors 30 programs yearly? In addition, the agency provides meals to 60 sites, nutrition classes, fitness demonstrations, respite programs, and resources for family members and caregivers. For more information, please log on to www.dcoa.dc.gov or dial 202-724-5622.
Welcome back. Let's turn our attention to what steps that family members can take. What are the steps that family members, caregivers, and professionals can take to combat elder abuse in our community?
One of the things that can happen is that while your loved one still has mental capacity, it is good, number one, to get them to initiate and prepare a will. We always encourage that, as well as seek to try to have a person identified as their power of attorney. That gives them at least some likelihood and understanding of who will at least be in charge of making financial decisions, depending on the way that the power of attorney has been composed. It would give that person the right to make healthcare decisions, financial decisions in the best interest of that individual, especially in the days now where we're seeing a very high incidence of dementia and other memory loss diseases.
I mean, basically, the family members need to be responsible. If they see a family member or a caregiver who they suspect are abusing, their loved one, they can obviously step in, and get rid of that person, get them out of the house or whatever. Yes. They have to take responsibility to report the abuse, and like you said, that can be to the police, that can be to Adult Protective Services. There are elder abuse cases where family members know what's going on, but they don't report it because they don't want to turn in, once again, that reluctance to turn in another family member, to report them either to another your agency or to law enforcement. They think they can handle it within the family. Sometimes it can be handled within the family by removing that person and then just taking it. But sometimes you have to go to an agency, to law enforcement, because if you don't, it keeps getting worse and it goes on, and finally that person may have lost all their assets or their physical well-being. They're being abused physically and financially.
Yes.
From the point of view of the senior, let's start there. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Yes. So if a person contacts a senior or any citizen and says, I'm going to make you rich quick, hang up. Do not engage in that conversation.
Unsolicited calls.
Unsolicited calls offering promises of great wealth are a huge danger, and don't go down that road.
Red flag. Absolutely.
And also just try to think about a financial wellness plan so that you and your family are together on how, as you grow older and things change, as Sheila said, who's going to be in charge, and it's always good to have 2 pairs of eyes on a situation. Yes. So those are preventive measures. Then hopefully you won't have anything to report if you take care of yourself in the first place. But if you do suspect anything that's bad has happened to you or someone in your family, please contact either the law enforcement or Adult Protective Services or the other offices here and make it, because stop it as soon as you can. Yes. The money will go away.
Absolutely.
And I would just like to add to what my colleagues have said, increasing your awareness and becoming more informed and educated about ways to prevent abuse and neglect and the different interventions that one can take.
Yes.
The first thought that came to my mind was the same as what Doug said, to report it. One of the things that we know is taught across the country, if you see something, you should say something. And so we, encourage people to do that. And there's also, Deborah, as you know, the Money Smart training for older adults, which you and I have been very much involved with recently. And I understand, I believe it's been over 500 people who've been educated and who've received that training, which talks a lot about how to deal with these scam artists, the telephone, over the phone, and computers, internet. And the purpose of this training, which was jointly developed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, was to raise the awareness to older people about being money smart and planning for their future. We talked about the wills and powers of attorney, guardianship, and those types of things. So I think that, in addition to what everyone else has said, is very important to know and to follow through on, and to make sure that people know how to access these trainings and where they can receive this information.
All of these are excellent points, and the Money Smart for Older Adults consumer education module is a very comprehensive program that is available to community groups through the members of the Elder Abuse Prevention Committee, and we're happy to make that presentation available to your organization. I want to thank all of the panelists today for all of your excellent contributions and for joining us for this important discussion, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today to discuss the growing challenge of preventing elder abuse and neglect in the District of Columbia. Anyone can be a victim of elder abuse. Please be alert to the signs of elder abuse and neglect of seniors you know, your family, your friends, neighbors, and other acquaintances, and do not hesitate to report your concerns to DC Adult Protective Services, which will investigate your report in a confidential manner. The telephone number for DC Adult Protective Services, as Dr. Jones said earlier, is 202-541-3950. For more information about how to identify elder abuse and the services provided in the DC area, you can log on to www.dcoa.dc.gov. Until next time, I'm Deborah Royster, and thank you so much for joining us.